June 1920. Do you like it? Daisy passed over a plate on which an apple crumble slice had been placed. Milo looked at it. It looks like a pudding. She was sitting at the table in the servants' dining room, her place at the very end, watching the activity, watching the cooking and the movement of people making the food, taking the food. A smile from Thomas and she returned from her thoughts about apples and varieties and her poor attempts at beginning to try to grow the seeds she had preserved for so many years in her father's garden. It could be the soil or the position, or the water, Daisy told her. Her father-in-law might be able to help. Or that the seeds were too old, or not kept well. It was just a fancy. Milo told her she needed time to think, and to learn. And she hadn't it at the moment. Without telling anyone, well, without telling anyone but Thomas, Milo had begun to stay over in the generator room, so that she would be able to be on the grounds as soon as she could. Not every night, for sometimes she needed access to St. Michael's Church and its transmitter. She had even gained permission to set up a third, a little way out, towards Ripon, at lands belonging to Lord Grantham, which amounted to several sheep and a tussock on high ground. From what she could discern, from her calculations and the reception of the signals, the speed, the wavelengths involved, Milo believed she had managed to transmit and relay without the need of a person receiving signal, higher energy radio waves. She needed to visit Chadwick, or he needed to visit here, for this to be verified. And if it were verified, then she could write up her own paper and have it published. Milo pulled the apple crumble towards her, and took the spoon from Daisy's outstretched hand. Thank you, she remembered, and dug it into the pudding. It was delicious, and it took Milo next to no time to finish the piece. Don't you want to learn to cook? Daisy asked her when Milo had finished. She took the plate up and Milo watched her. Yes, Milo admitted. Sometimes. But things always got in the way. As in the way of the gardening. Mr. Molesley Sr. had even come round to her door a month or so before and lamented the garden going wild and whether he had permission to work it. Milo could not say she cared for the garden being tended or not, but it seemed that tended gardens pleased most people, and to they must be the right thing to have. I can show you, if you like, Daisy offered. Mrs. Batemore turned her head. Only when you've finished everything you have to do for us, first, she told her. At the same time that Milo sensed tension about the subject, Mrs. Batemore smiled at her. You don't know nothing. Thomas told me you can prepare sandwiches, make tea. A cake? Milo nodded. But the truth was, people barely touched what she ate when she chose to be hostess. That was a simple enough conclusion, was it not? That it wasn't all that good. She liked what she made. But Mrs. Doyle, who still came to tend the house for her, flat out refused to teach Milo anything. I am just too busy, she told Milo. And that was that. But she brought up shopping to Milo, which saved her time, especially now it was nearly the summer and the nights were lighter and the mornings, too. There had been some days when she had seen the sun sinking over the western horizon and felt as if she had merely blinked a few times as she worked by candlelight at the top of the church tower, only to see it rising up again in the east, illuminating a new day. And if she were to be given meals at Downton, and eventually get to Manchester and be catered for there, then was there a use? Yet, in her deepest thoughts, Milo did not know whether that was a future she could rely on. Her father's death had been nearly a year ago, and still her guardian had not been found. The estate was in a state of inertia, for Milo was not old enough to sell it, or do anything with it. She could not move out, she could not take the money from the business, or even sell that. Thomas had tried to explain to her, and she not been that receptive. And he had come back to her and tried again, which was a little better. But it had crystallized fully in Milo's mind after the presentation of Ernest's work at Downton, when it was clear she could not be accepted, fully, as a student, under Chadwick, at Manchester. 88,888,888. But she had one thing. At least there was something. And when Thomas came to visit her 2 days later, she showed him the letter. What have you got to send to the patent office? Thomas asked her. Ernest's work, Milo told him. I finished it, it works. Dr. Chadwick has verified it. And you need to go to York to file it. Milo nodded. Thomas, will you help me? She asked, her usual awkwardness in the face of something she had never seen before coming out, which suited Thomas. He placed a hand on her arm. It would take his mind off his mistake, and asked Carson to ask his lordship if he could take Milo. I can, Matthew told him, for Mr. Crawley had arrived at Milo's house shortly afterwards. Poor timing, though it was his own fault, Thomas told himself. He had approached the man. I have business in York, he said. Tomorrow I can show you where the patent office is, Miss Ashby. Thomas kissed Milo gently on the cheek as he left, and the two men strode towards Crawley House, where Matthew had agreed to speak to Thomas about Milo's business. Mr. Crawley, Thomas said, as they walked. Milo is 16 years old. While she is wise in some ways, she most certainly is not in others. I understand. Barrow. Matthew Crawley nodded. It is good that you watch out for her. Thomas's heart sank. Damn it, this new arrangement had robbed him of a chance to speak to his cousin. For now, considering the trouble he was in, Thomas had wanted to accelerate the prospect of marriage. Business? What business is that young Milo is going off to do? Tom Branson asked of Thomas Barrow when he arrived back at Downton. Matthew mentioned it, he added, when he received a ferocious look from Thomas. Milo's business, he said, abruptly, then added, sir, and walked off. But his own business, his own mistake, had taken a turn for the worst, and he had no other arrangement. That night, in the darkness, Thomas Barrow ran through all the possibilities. The easiest one would be that he could steal Milo right away. He could take her to Scotland under false pretenses. She would marry him. He was sure it might be immoral but not illegal as long as she consented. There were professional witnesses in some of the border towns, people who made a living being a witness to two people appearing at Kirk's with a desperate desire to become one. Yet, the voice in his head, which poured cold water on his reckless plan, you must hold on, wait for the right time. This is a person who cares for you so much, yet not conventionally. Get it right and many birds may be one with a single arrow. 88,888,888. So, when Matthew Crawley arrived back from York, Thomas made to Crawley House to see him. Mr. Crawley was reading a newspaper when he was shown in and looked up from it. Barrow, he declared, folding up the paper, and got to his feet. It is good to see you. How may I help you? And Thomas told him everything, about helping Milo with her circumstances when her father died, encouraged her to speak to Chadwick about Ernest's work, how he had taken the liberty to look into the guardianship business to help her. And I agree, Matthew told Thomas Barrow. I have looked into Lucina's situation, Cousin Robert, that is to say, Lord Grantham asked me to do so. Marriage is the only way out of waiting for a judge to sift through family tree after family tree. He frowned Thomas and put a hand to his chin. Whom are you suggesting? And when Thomas did not answer immediately, nor, in fact, at all, Matthew's face changed to one expressing amazement. Not you, Mr. Crawley, Thomas replied. This is delicate. It is Milo I am speaking about. She is vulnerable. And you seek to control her assets, her wealth. I must tell you, I know what Cousin Robert has told me about you, about your behavior. A man under threat of removal of his livelihood often makes bold claims. Thomas looked at him for a second, then looked away. Do you not see this might be viewed as exploitation? Thomas shot his head back round and narrowed his eyes. No, I do not. He fixed Matthew Crawley with an intense look, and refused to look away. What you see, a vulnerable young woman who I have known all my life, growing into an adult with no one to protect her. I see someone in her family, a stranger, for it has gone on so long, taking control of it all for her. Perhaps even shipping her off somewhere and pocketing the assets. Thomas broke off, trying to manage his feelings. Even he was astonishing himself at his own strength of feeling towards his lover's little sister. Mr. Crawley, he continued, in a more conciliatory tone, I am not seeking her fortune, nor her body, nor to exploit her in any way. Yes, my situation will improve, but I do not intend to leave Downton. Lord Grantham has seen fit to confer a position of under-butler to me, and I have accepted. I see, Matthew Crawley nodded. Look, I am sorry that I assumed those things. Of course, there was the accusation, and that is the other thing, Thomas interjected, keen to get off the subject of his throwing himself at Jimmy. If I can support Milo, I will be able to have a purpose. Perhaps those feelings will eventually go away. Though, Thomas thought, he doubted it. Matthew gave Fred Bonner's letter another glance, and then looked at Thomas, giving him a brief nod. Leave it with me, he told Thomas. If you want to get it done so she can attend Manchester in September, I will have to work quickly. On the subject of money, Thomas furthered, making sure there was no facet of this that would be overlooked, and therefore become the thing that prevented their marriage in the end. May I propose I pay at a later date, once we marry? Or if this is not acceptable, on a weekly basis? Take it directly from my wages, say. Matthew smiled. We can sort that out later. I will not leave you out of pocket. He laid a hand on Thomas's shoulder for a second. What you are doing is an honorable thing, a noble thing. I am glad you see it that way. And Thomas felt his heart much lighter as he walked his way back to Downton. And Matthew Crawley told Mrs. Crawley, who, like him, was astonished and shocked. And then, when he had told her the whole story, smiled and admitted that she, too, found it a fine thing for Thomas to do for Milo. Tell me when and we will go, Isabel Crawley told her son. Then they will have at least someone they know. 88,888,888. And how is she doing? Mrs. Hughes asked one morning, as the cricket was being planned. Will she come? Her brother was a marvelous player, though he did play for the village. Thomas nodded to Mrs. Hughes, but said nothing. He had not mentioned the cricket to Milo. He had not mentioned much to Milo, and had not seen her for many days. He was ashamed. Ashamed he had given in to his urges, ashamed he had betrayed Ernest's memory, although his lover would have told him to move on. Ashamed he had decided to go through with marriage to Milo and pretend that it was all for her own good, when he stood to benefit handsomely, too, and not just financially. Many men like him were married, and suspicion of homosexuality fell from them like snow melting to water in the face of the sun on an early spring morning. He had made a mistake, been too incautious. The kiss, why had he done it? He had been mourning for Ernest, that was true. Not even gone 2 years and the pain was still within him. Milo, with her hair lengthening and her concession to looser-fitting clothing rather than Ernest's old clothes, no longer made him gasp when first he had seen her, like his lover but with mistakes. It had been resolved, or at least, Lord Grantham had resolved it. Settled with the staff, not a bit of it. O'Brien, once an ally, had taken against him when he had criticised her nephew Alfred, and had been behind the footman urging Jimmy to report him. Urging Jimmy to make Carson give Thomas a bad reference, for he was to leave Downton. It had taken his humiliation, his admission of failure to ask Bates for help. All animosity was set aside when Bates asked him to give him something to use against Maureen O'Brien. He had, and her ladyship's soap, and O'Brien had stopped immediately. But Alfred Nugent had not, and was threatening to call the police. Milo must have sensed something was wrong when Thomas came to the house in the early hours of the morning. She was just getting up herself, getting up from an armchair in the parlour, and was not in a state to meet guests. But Thomas had shown himself in, and leaned against the wall beside her in the closed shop front, where she sold the appliances that were now accelerating in their availability since the end of the war. She had been holding a screwdriver away from herself, waiting for an attack from a would-be intruder, and had gasped in relief when she had seen Thomas. "Please tell me what the matter is?" she asked. And he had, of sorts. He had been improper to a man at Downton, another footman. "And you've said you are sorry?" "I have," Thomas assured her. "And he has accepted?" "He has." Milo smiled. "And you still have your job?" Thomas nodded, his words congesting in his throat. "Then, you should not worry," Milo said. "Anyone can see you are sorry for your behavior." And with that, Thomas put out his arms and Milo hugged him. It was strange for it to be that way round all her life. Milo remembered it was Thomas who was the one who comforted her. "What I did was against the law," Thomas admitted. And I could be reported for it. And I could go to prison. Milo stepped back and said nothing for a moment as Thomas thought, he would be in a worse position than Bates. Men like him were persecuted in prison, they had died in prison. Then I will speak for you, Milo assured him. If my words have any worth, I will tell them I have known you to be honorable and honest all the time I have known you. Thomas said nothing. He knew she would, too. What are you working on? Thomas asked. Is it with the transmitter at Downton and the church? It turned out, and with plenty of things Thomas did not understand. Milo's verbal ebullience, sometimes too much for him, was, that day, a salve, a balm. Her familiar manner of telling him everything, whether he understood it or not, was enough of an anchor back to Ernest. And even Meitner, who got on with Rutherford so well in Canada, was skeptical of Chadwick's claim that the spectral lines were entirely due to secondary electrons, you see, while the primary ones formed a continuous spectrum. But then she went to prove it herself. Milo held out a letter, and Thomas took it, looking at the angular letters of another scientist involved in the same type of work, a German woman from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. So pragmatism began to set back in, quelling his emotional response to it all, and it was Milo's manner which made him feel better. It did not matter he did not understand what she was saying, like it did not matter that Milo did not understand about people and the need for a variety of clothes, and social conventions. With Milo, what he liked so much about her was that she accepted that other people did need those things and respected their need for them. It wasn't always the same in return. Bates was still hostile, Anna was still cold to her. Even Jimmy was put out because she did not join in the universal female adoration that he normally received. So of course, alternating current is superior. Unless the new appliances are not to work, she was saying. Tesla can only be right, Edison can only be wrong. And I am not just saying that because I manage my father's business which relies on AC. She looked to Thomas. Do you see what I am saying? You are saying that this other system, direct current, is not as versatile as alternating current, Thomas replied. Milo beamed. What is Downton's system? Oh, AC. Of course, Milo replied. Otherwise Mrs. Hughes could not use her toaster, otherwise Mr. Carson could not use his carpet cleaner, not Anna the electrical iron, or Mrs. Batemore the cold box. She looked down, and then away. Thomas waited for her to find her words. I am to go to Manchester to confer with Dr. Chadwick, Milo told him. He is overseeing my studentship, because I haven't a degree, so I will be an associate. She looked at him, and ventured, would you come with me? Why do you need anyone to come with you? Thomas asked. I know you sent Daisy, on the night of Ernest's talk, she told him. I am aware that I do not behave typically. Milo glanced away. And it tires me, to remember it all. Milo, Thomas said suddenly. There is something I wish to discuss with you. Milo said nothing. Just waited. What if I told you I had thought of a way that you could go to Manchester to study, to be at the Cavendish building every day, and work there? Milo jerked her head to Thomas, her eyes wide. Truly? It is delicate, and I hope you do not mind that I took the liberty of looking into your guardianship. She would not mind, Thomas was sure, but he had made a point of saying so anyway. Yes, the justices of the peace, lawyers acting for them, are seeking your guardianship. You are not yet 17, nor even 21, when you can act for yourself. And I know, he looked at her seriously, that you would be disquieted if you found out that this guardian was someone you could not tolerate, who would upset you. Milo looked down, and was nodding. She had also begun to cry. No, Thomas told her, the sternness in his voice from when she was a child making an appearance. I have not come to tell you this for tears. I have found an answer. Will you sit by me? This is by no means easy. Milo did, her hair glimmering in the brightness of the lamp behind her. Have you thought to marry, Milo? Thomas asked her. Is there someone who you would wish to marry? Milo looked thoughtful, as if rifling through a mental catalogue for entries under the word marriage. Ernest, and my father, both said that I should avoid it. But Ernest also said that it should be someone he knew, such as such as Dr. Chadwick, or Douglas Hartree. He was Ern's friend at Cambridge. Or someone from the faculty. They are the only people I can talk to, and who listen, besides you. But, Milo looked away. Milo. She turned her head back and looked at Thomas Barrow. Would you wish to marry one of them? Chadwick, for instance? No, not Chadwick, Milo smiled, as she thought of her friend. But I would be scared to marry. Thomas, I do not wish to marry. She leaned her head closer to Thomas and looked at him, gravely. Things go on between a man and a woman. She shook her head. I have heard what they are and I don't think I would like that. Perfect, Thomas thought. Why are you talking about this with me? Thomas leaned closer to Milo. Because, in the legal arrangements your father left, you must have a guardian, a next of kin until you are 21. Your grandmother, your mother's family, even Marconi, are ineligible. But, it seems, though your Ashby family does not seem to have a suitable guardian either, back over through your Jameson family you related to several Anglo-Irish noble families. They are still looking for the guardian for you, Milo, Thomas summed up. There is something else, he added quickly, before Milo got a chance to fret over his words. Should you marry, a guardian would not be needed. Your husband would act for you, would act in your interests, Milo. But I do not want to marry, Milo insisted, horror on her face. Even though you would be able to attend university, work beside Chadwick with Rutherford on those ideas about waves that you told us all at the presentation? He let the question sink in, before adding in the next layer. If you were to marry me, Milo, Thomas Barrow proposed, I would never ever ask you to do what married men and married women do, he told her, with absolute certainty. You could go to work on your studentship. I would know that I have helped Ernest, helped your father. Your money would be your own, your life in this house, your father's business needn't change. There would be no babies for you, no fear of what happened with Lady Sybil. Milo looked away, and then back to Thomas. He saw then what relief looked like. As if Milo had been washed anew with the best carbolic soap. Her eyes glimmered. Won't anyone stop us? Not this guardian, whoever they may be? Not Mr. Carson, or his lordship? Thomas laughed. No, they cannot say who I can or cannot marry, and no one can tell you. Although, we must travel to Scotland for it, for their laws allow someone of your age to marry. But Thomas realized he did not need to carry on. The look on Milo's face told him everything he needed to know. He had known her long enough. When Milo asked, her eyes were lit up. Hope lived in them, in her. Because, yes, Thomas, she added, the family travel in the summer. Thomas continued smoothly. I will ensure it is all legal with Matthew Crawley and make the arrangements. It means you could continue at Manchester in the autumn term. Thomas smiled, and smiled more at the look on Milo's face. All guilt at using her for his own purposes washing away like footprints on a beach from a new sea tide.